In this section we're going to talk about factors that affect pregnancy rates to artificial insemination. This is probably fairly important information because this is where you're often involved in advising people but also in troubleshooting problems that occur. Two things we're going to look at first is the dose of semen and the sire effects, but then later on we'll talk about some other aspects such as the timing of AI in relation to the onset of estrus, semen storage, semen handling, insemination technique, poor records, and then fertility of cows. So let's first of all just look at the dose of semen and effects due to sire. When we think about the dose of semen that is needed for optimum fertility, if you think about it, if you start off with nothing, no sperm in the straw, you'll get nothing pregnant. As you start to increase the number of sperm within the straw, pregnancy rate will start to increase. As you increase that semen dose more, pregnancy rate will keep increasing. But eventually you're going to reach a point where even though you put more sperm into each dose, you won't increase the pregnancy rate anymore. And this is what's called a threshold concentration. So in cows, this number is usually somewhere between 5 and 10 million sperm deposited into the uterus of the cow. Once you get over those levels, pregnancy rates usually don't go up very much. So in semen supplying companies, they usually are calculating the dose based on what they think this threshold value will be for that particular bull. If you don't know it, then they'll usually try to aim for 10 million progressively motile normal sperm per dose. If the bull is in high demand, they may reduce that a bit, somewhere between 6 and 10 million. Again, when you're freezing it, you'll double that amount because you know that half of your sperm will probably die during the freezing and thawing process. So just to reiterate, in cows we're looking at 5 to 10 million approximately per insemination are required for optimum fertility. That's where the threshold is. You know that at 10 million you're probably at the threshold or above it. At between 5 and 10, for some bulls you'll be at threshold, for other bulls you may be below threshold. So in general, we'll freeze 20 to 25 million sperm per dose and assume that that will give us about 10 million progressively motile and live sperm. When you're freezing and thawing frozen semen, so if you buy a straw of frozen semen or you're processing semen, generally producers of that semen will not sell semen that is less than 30% of the sperm are alive and normal, with 30% of the sperm progressively motile. So when you thaw a dose of semen, you should see more than 30% of the sperm cells being progressively motile. If it's less than that, it doesn't mean that it's infertile. Maybe they've added more sperm so that the total number of progressively motile and normal sperm is still in excess of 5 or 10 million, but there's a greater risk that fertility will be compromised. So generally speaking, in commercial AI centres, if they freeze a batch of semen and there's less than 30% of the sperm progressively motile, they'll throw it out and they won't sell it. The bull individually can also influence fertility. So even though two bulls may have the equivalent number of sperm in a straw, their motility is similar. Some bulls will have greater fertility than others, and this can be due to differences in longevity of that sperm within the reproductive tract. Maybe one bull's sperm live a bit longer than another bull's. Maybe one bull's sperm can survive the freezing and thawing process better. Maybe their cell membranes are less damaged. Maybe there are other factors going on that we don't know about that convey a fertility advantage. Some bulls we can compensate for this lower fertility effect by just putting more sperm within the straw, and this would be the case if the defect is what we call compensable. But with other sires, then they may have an uncompensable defect, in which case adding more sperm to the straw won't improve the fertility. So sire can have an effect on fertility. So if you're ever doing an experiment, you're always putting into your statistics which bull you're using, because some bulls the fertility will vary, and that can influence your results of your trial. This is just showing a graph of different bulls and showing how some bulls, by increasing the number of sperm, you can get different threshold pregnancy rates. Some bulls will get higher pregnancy rates than others and at a lower number of sperm per straw. We know that for most bulls, between 5 and 10 million sperm per dose, they'll reach this threshold level here, so that's generally what the industry is aiming for. So here's a review question for you to consider. Some dairy farmers in particular will split their straw, so they'll buy straws of semen, and to save money they'll have, if there are 2 cows on heat, they'll put half the semen into one cow and half the semen into the other cow. And this is done simply to reduce costs. What is the risk associated with this practice based on what you know about the effective dose on pregnancy rates? Just have a think about that for a minute and then I'll come back and answer it. Okay, the risk as I see it is that, generally speaking, the farmer doesn't know what the inherent fertility of that semen is, of that particular sire. It may well be that if you only inseminate half the dose, maybe that half a dose is sufficient to reach threshold fertility and fertility won't be compromised. But maybe that bull actually needs the full dose to achieve normal pregnancy rates, in which case you would be at a disadvantage and you would reduce your pregnancy rates. You also don't actually know how many sperm are in that straw unless you count it. The supplier doesn't tell you. So it may be that bull was in high demand and they've actually reduced the number of sperm close to threshold concentration. So when you go and split it, you'll actually reduce the pregnancy rates. Now there may be some bulls that if you do split the straw, you don't compromise pregnancy rates at all, because at the lower dose per cow, that bull is still can achieve threshold concentrations at a lower sperm number. So when you buy the straw, you don't actually know that, and so you take a risk. And so I always advise farmers that you're taking a greater risk of reducing pregnancy rates, and it may cost you in the long run if you do that. Let's look at some other factors that affect pregnancy rates to AI, and we'll look at the timing of AI in relation to the onset of estrus. As early as the 1940s, there's a fellow called Trimberger produced this graph, and this was used within the industry for several years, many years, and basically it showed that if you inseminated cows as soon as they came in heat, pregnancy rates were less than if you waited approximately half a day to inseminate that cow. If you waited too long, like more than a day, then pregnancy rates started to decline. So this information was used to formulate what was called the AM/PM rule. And so farmers would say, well, if I detect heat in the morning, then I'll inseminate that cow in the afternoon. If I detect her in heat in the afternoon, I'll inseminate her the following morning. And that was called the AM/PM rule. It was used for many years. Some more recent research has shown us some of the reasons why this graph illustrated well what happens in relation to when you should inseminate cows. If cows come on heat at, say, time 0, if you inseminate them prior to time 0 or at time 0, the sperm have to hang around in the reproductive tract quite a while, approximately 27 hours, for that egg to be released. During that time, the viability of the sperm actually reduces, and so the fertilization rate is compromised. Because sperm are there as soon as the egg pops out, then the egg quality is quite good. So embryo quality is actually quite good, but the fertilization rate is lower. And so that's why you get compromised pregnancy rates if you inseminate too early. If you inseminate too late, so that you deposit the sperm close to when ovulation is occurring, you'll get high fertilization rates because there's plenty of sperm present. But if that egg has been sitting around waiting for a few hours before the sperm are ready to fertilize, then the egg quality will actually decrease, and this will result in low embryo quality. So if you're inseminating, a useful compromise is to inseminate approximately 4 to 14 hours after the onset of estrus. And so in this region here, where you get a bit of a compromise between getting a good fertilisation rate and good embryo quality. So if we talk about what is the optimum time for AI on farms, then if you don't know the onset of estrus, that is, if the cow's in heat, you know the cow's in heat, but you don't know exactly when she came in heat, then rather than wait 12 hours to inseminate her, the recommendation is you just go ahead and inseminate that cow, because you don't know what stage of the estrus the cow is at. Now, a number of trials have been done to verify this, and so it's the general industry recommendation now that just once a day insemination, as soon as cows are detected in heat. If you don't know when they actually came in heat, then just inseminate them at that time. That way you avoid waiting too long if they've been in heat for several hours before you notice them, or inseminating too early if you think, because the chances are you probably didn't see them when they just came in heat. This is just looking at a trial where once daily insemination was compared to using the AM/PM rule. So in this trial, as soon as cows were detected in heat, they were inseminated, and the pregnancy rate, or actually non-return rate here rather than pregnancy rate, was 60.1%. And using the AM/PM rule, it was virtually the same. So what I would recommend to farmers that they do, if you're detecting heat once a day, which is what a lot of people are doing on farms, or infrequently, then as soon as you detect a cow in estrus, then inseminate her. If you know exactly when the cow's just started to come in heat, then AI that cow 14 to 14 hours post after the onset of estrus. So here are some review questions to consider. What is the optimum time for inseminating cows following the onset of estrus? Well, it should be somewhere between 4 and 14 hours after the onset of estrus. What can happen if you inseminate cows too early or too late following the onset of estrus? Again, refer back to the graph. If you inseminate cows too early, then the sperm will be quite old by the time that the egg pops out, and so fertilisation rates can be lower. But embryo quality should be good, because the egg's not too old before it's fertilised. If you inseminate too late, so that the egg has already been released and is aging, then fertilisation rates will be high because the sperm have just been deposited. A lot of them are still alive and active, but because of the aging oocyte, you'll get an increase in early embryonic loss rates. So what recommendation would you make to farmers in relation to when they should inseminate their cows following detection of estrus? Well, if you don't know when the cow actually came in heat, then just go ahead and inseminate her as soon as you find her in heat. If you do happen to know exactly when that cow came in heat, if she just came in heat now, then it's better to wait 4 to 14 hours before inseminating that cow.